Hi guys, and welcome to the Onara set review. I mean, it's a pretty belated set review because the set's already been out for... Wait, how many months has it been out for? I forgot at this point.
3 or 4? It's been a while.
Okay, yeah, but since we're reviewing it post it coming out, we actually get to say more stuff about cards now that we've seen them in action. We're not just speculating on stuff anymore. But without further ado, let's start.
Yeah, so I think just first going over cards that I've seen play in a kind of known quantities is probably a good idea. Just kind of rounding some off. Don't have the Forgemaster and basically any deck with equipment.
Yeah.
Maybe even the most played card in set. Or one of the most played cards in set. Zaukar and basically any white sideboard. Tongue Twister had its moment shine, got nerfed.
Well,
Less shiny now.
is it still playable?
It's cutting it close to like other win cons. I mean, I'm gonna say no. At the very least, you need to really be up to using it as a creature now. You can't just rely on the adventure. And using it as a creature for cost reductions is a bit difficult at times, even with stuff like Conjure Realities to kind of get the most out of them, even on condition.
Yeah.
Darksand Acolyte and Fluff Whisperer.
Man,
two cards
that completely wrecked both of the decks I played in the GP recently.
Yeah, Darksand Acolyte completely obliterating any kind of deck that spams the board, where like in addition to your own clerics triggering your soul sisters, your opponents do as well. And Darksand Acolyte without any removal threatening it is really insane.
Yeah.
Just out of that condition, it's less exciting, but still good. Valdez has played a ton before the nerf.
It still is played a bunch.
Yeah, still sees a bunch of play now, though I think more so on the sideboard as a one-mana discard option with like a creature backside.
Well, I feel like Valdez is the face of the set, and like it even got pre-released in MSC 1 month before the actual set, so definitely the card that probably has seen the most play in the set, especially because of the early release.
It's probably double anything else in the set in kind of play rate, just because of how like omnipresent it at the very least used to be in basically every black deck.
Yeah.
Now with the haste, it's a bit harder to. Well, rather, you don't want to jam in every black deck, but even it's still great in the sideboard as a tool, like 2-for-1 in control or whatnot. A lot of times, like Stolen Secrets and the Pinch Pennies are close enough that you're willing to make the change.
Yeah.
No Good Gunpointer showed up a couple times in like Burn or black decks that are kind of trying to race as a life gain tool.
Yeah.
3 cheers, getting 3 spells in Reality is pretty scary. Make sure you don't run out of gas. Metal Munch in every red sideboard, very present sideboard card.
I mean, it's one man destroy target artifact. What else can you ask for? It even wrecks tokens and small creatures too.
Yeah, but the double up on hitting artifacts and hitting go white decks is really nice.
Although it is a sorcery, so it's not completely outclassing stuff like Flaming Point Technique.
Yeah, that's true. But I think generally speaking, people have moved on from Flaming Point Technique.
Yeah.
Then we have Pirates showing up a couple times in leagues. Forgemaster being basically the card that makes the deck what it is. Forgemaster with Helene is just an incredible combination.
Makes a bunch of attackers, and then one of them even sticks around. So it's building a board, but still pushing a bunch of damage at the same time.
Forgemaster, I think, is definitely what you're playing Pirates for. Even if there's a couple of other unique cards in Pirates that other tribal decks don't get access to, Forgemaster is really kind of the highlight. Burning Heart as kind of an answer to Infectious Ego or other X4s in kind of bigger red decks.
Yeah.
Leafdown Sizzlemage as a very good ritual.
I think it's probably the best ritual left after the other rituals all got banned.
Yeah, I guess that's true. That after Scintillate and Lotus Studies and Oddities Invocation all got hit, and now we're just left with the triple red rituals. Sizzlemage, I think, just is the best ritual, which puts it on a pedestal, though admittedly not a super high one.
Well, I mean, what else is it even competing with? Left on the weight side?
Yeah, but the thing is that mono red rituals are not that heavily played. Not that it's not the best one.
Yeah.
Astralhorn Familiar shows up in green-white counters kind of decks occasionally.
Counter / Stompy.
Yeah, just a very scary card in general. 2-mana 5/4 with upside is definitely a stat line that you want to be looking out for. But as companion, I think you can speak on that card.
Yeah, well, I mean, it looks pretty unassuming at first until you realize that it actually is just a 1-drop that taps for 2 mana if you're playing cards that spam the board with tokens. So you can do stuff like turn 1 Critic's Companion, turn 2, play a 1 mana card that makes 2 guys, and then you tap all of these guys, and then now you have 2 more mana plus your land drop. So you basically get to use 4 mana on turn 2.
Yeah, going straight from 1 to 4 is definitely an insane curve, even if you can't play 4-drop with the mana.
EHS is a pretty good 3-drop to play off this thing.
You definitely want to get EHS is a very natural companion to Critic's Companion, since on top of it wrapping into EHS on turn 2, which is always something you want to be doing, it also kind of plays well into that kind of 1 to 3+1 curve, or 1 to 2+2 curve in terms of mana cost. And then also EHS can cast the Adventure through Rules Quick.
Yep.
So very good hit off EHS as well.
And plus, it's not even a bad top deck because the Adventure side is just decent on its own in these sorts of decks that want to spam the board.
Very true. Though mainly there's kind of been talk about green-white Creature Vomit being hit, and this is definitely one of the cards that could be hit, so maybe it won't be in that state for too much longer, but we'll see.
Maybe the video will be outdated by the time I upload it.
Very possible. So then we have Mattia. Shows up in a couple decks, mainly green-white counters and Teamer Tempo.
I think it's the savior of Teamer Tempo.
Yeah, I think Mattia is really what makes the current Teamer Tempo list much more like modern and like kind of up-to-date. Whereas previously there's a lot of kind of minor issues with Teamer Tempo, so to speak, where you can't really apply pressure until turn 4, as an example, since all your threats are kind of costly with like Available and Meddler and Bounty of the Gardens kind of needing additional conditions to really get going, whereas Mattia just comes down and starts swinging and never stops.
It's also really good in Legends aggro because it gives them a flash threat that also just needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, very true. Being able to operate on instant speed, even if the rest of your deck operates sorcery speed, is a really huge boon to a lot of situations, since you're much more able to play around counter magic, and especially in Mattia's case, since he can put a counter on another creature, so protecting from Sheldrain's Rage or whatnot, winning combat. So like if you have multiples, you can use one to buff the original.
Yeah. Also, quick question. How many times has Mattia's activated ability actually been activated?
To my knowledge, 0.
Which is actually really funny to think about because, like, that's a good rate for that sort of ability, especially on something that has a tap trigger.
Yeah. I guess it is a decent rate. But at the same time, this is the kind of effect that isn't really going to show up in Constructed very much, because there's so many decks that just don't care about a lure kind of effect. Either because they just want to chump block, using Portal Fracture tokens, whatever, or they're just bigger than whatever you have.
But it does mean that you can use Mattia to put counters on stuff even if you don't attack with it.
Yeah, in that rare situation, Mattia himself can't attack.
Yeah.
Definitely surprising that I've never personally seen it come up, at least. It feels like it should.
I mean, I guess Mattia it has the same Questing Beast problem where it has a bunch of abilities and some of them don't actually come up most of the time, but the few times it comes up, it really matters. Yeah,
Reach is another example of that, where I've definitely seen the Reach come up, occasionally blocking like Panya, as an example.
Yeah, that's a huge blowout.
Admittedly, most of that is just that people don't realize Mattia has Reach.
Hey, he has a bow. I mean, what else do you need?
I guess that's true. Moving forward, we have Scalebruiser, again showing up in these green-white countery kind of lists. Good 1-drop.
Yeah.
Definitely if Warriors becomes a deck, this is your 1-drop in Warriors.
I think it's competing with Ever-Gnawing Rat and Munch Beastkeeper.
Yeah, so green-white counters definitely isn't pressed for 1-drops, but especially if you want to play Gillo, having another name on your 1-drops is always nice.
Yeah.
So you don't end up with 4 Ever-Gnawing Rats and 4 Beastkeepers and not enough names for Gillo. Additionally, for Astralhorn Familiar being multiple unique creature types, whereas my 2 Beastkeepers are Nephilim Shaman, if I'm remembering correctly.
I mean, Nephilim is a pretty unique creature type.
But importantly, it doesn't overlap with Lizard Warrior or Rat, so you can get to Menagerie much easier. Another thing Mattia does well, having 3 unique creature types compared to Astralhorn Familiar.
Yeah.
So then we have Brothers Reunion, shows up in these same kind of decks, also shows up in EHS aggro decks. So Hounds as the key example of that. Definitely a very scary card when you're playing it with all these very efficiently costed aggressive threats.
Yeah. And also, if you're running any haste creatures in your deck, then it's possible that if you have a 1-drop out and you play this on turn 2, you can flip into haste creature and then attack with both creatures right away and get the second chapter trigger right away.
Yeah, Hounds being able to do that is definitely a huge boon to Brothers Reunion, that deck, even if it is kind of a bit luck-based whether you hit. Speaking of tribal decks, there's also Humble Abode, not played in Hounds, but in Elves and whatnot. You get having other of these kind of Counter Souls type lands.
Yeah, and also works really well with Far Dancer Liege.
Yeah, Far Dancer Liege gets your 5-color lands up for Bustling Marketplace, so tribal decks can really start going full 5-color if they're willing to play all creatures, but mainly a kind of a numbers kind of card. Then we have Azos, Tyrant, Bleakrealm.
Well, if you want a cheat target that's not Tyrant Tributes, there you go.
Yeah, I played a bit with Azos, and Azos feels just like Tyrant Attributes 5 through 8, or alternately Tyrant Attributes is Azos 5 through 8, because they generally do very similar things. Slight differences: Tyrant doesn't deal with the board as well, the creatures at least, but gains you life. Azos deals the board really well. It's the hand a bit, depending on the deck they're hitting, but doesn't deal with lands very well. So a fully empty board, Azos isn't always the best against. But then Azos is one cheaper, so if you're ramping into it, comes on a full turn or two sooner than Tyrant. So there's trade-offs, but I think Azos definitely is very real as a threat in Reanimator or Yugi Hell kind of style decks.
Yeah.
So then random common in Explorer's Torch, really mainly being played as a cantrip that conveniently has an equipment type line. So your Dawnhill Forgemaster can fetch a cantrip. One a GP.
Yeah.
Single copy.
It's actually, I think this is probably the most efficient version of this sort of effect, because it's a one-man artifact that cantrips. Like, you can't make this sort of thing any cheaper.
Yeah, very true. There are definitely other options, with like Seal Driftway, but Explorer's Torch also working with Dawnhill Forgemaster, which is a very powerful card.
And Settle if you're that desperate.
Yeah, Settle as well. Though Settle can also -2, so it's a bit less needed, since you're not getting mana efficiency.
Also, like, the equip actually does matter, because if you're playing Dawnhill Forgemaster, it has double strike, so even just paying 2 to equip it and give something +1/+1, that's not ideal, but that's fine.
Yeah, definitely having ways to spend your mana in the late game is incredibly important and kind of understated, because obviously you don't want to build around it. But if you're already playing cards, you do need to have a plan to go into late game. So with the GP winning deck list, Valdez and Dawnhill Forgemaster were both played, and both of those cards fulfill that kind of role, where you get the base effect, kind of keep card parity, and then you also late game can throw down these adventure creatures and suit them up with random equipment and whatnot.
And stuff that you get off Settle, like Rod of Marble Roll. And stacking a bunch of equipment onto a single creature, especially if that creature has double strike, is actually a pretty solid plan. Especially if you're just getting the plan for free after you've already got your value from the cards.
Yeah, definitely doesn't take much to get bigger than other threats in the format. Nothing in the format really goes past a 4/4. So it's even a single +1/+1 boost. It goes a long way in terms of kind of getting a much stronger board presence.
Yeah.
On kind of more deadly threats like Dawnhill Forgemaster or Sworn Cohort and another.
But speaking of the GP winning deck, we also have Barx, Interplaner Mastermind.
Yeah, Barx has shown up a couple times. Obviously likes 1-mana artifacts that do other things. So Explorer's Torch, Sealed Way, that kind of stuff. Terraformer's Globe.
Yeah, Mara Bravo Roll, Skull Pit Trophy.
Yeah, so it's also seen play in kind of Bant Concord lists without any Concord cards, which just has such a ridiculous card advantage engine, where even just playing Barx on a cantripping artifact +1ing gets you 2 cards basically immediately, between the +1 and the equipment coming back to play when Barx dies. And then decent chance you're putting to spend a card to deal with Barx. So just 2 for 1, 3 for 1.
2 to 3 for 1. I mean, at least looking at some of the games of that deck, sometimes the opponent just doesn't bother to deal with Barx, because dealing with it already gives the opponent so much card advantage.
Yeah, I think Barx is probably just the single strongest card advantage engine in the format, between being so cheap and so hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Obviously, the card advantage isn't as impactful, since you do need to play a lot of cards to get Barx active. Like, if you're playing 10 one-man artifacts that cantrip, well, you're not playing other, like, interactive things. So all these Barx draws are kind of getting clogged up by these cantrips.
But maybe you're fine with that if you build your deck around having a bunch of cantripping artifacts.
Yeah, very true. So the Bank Concord list was playing around the Posey as an example of that.
Yeah, and they're also playing rail lines as additional Barx targets if you're that desperate.
Yeah, definitely not quite as good as something like cantrips, but worst comes to worst, can always Barx up a rail line and get started that way.
Also, do people realize that Barx has a -3 and a -10 ability?
No, I don't think he has either of those moves. I think he just has the +1.
Yes. Well, and also something else interesting about Barx is that if it dies, you still get to play the last card exiled due to how it's worded.
Yeah, that kind of adds to the difficulty in dealing with him. So I think all those cards are kind of somewhat known. Right? I think they're kind of set in the rules and people know what they're dealing with, at least to some extent, even if a couple of the cards probably have more play to them or more deck building around them. Like Barx probably has a whole slew of decks that haven't been explored yet.
Yeah.
But there are a ton of cards in the set that haven't really been explored very much, or as much. You have stuff like Duelist Poise, which, well, it did see some play in Flash Soldiers. It's also just a very efficient anthem for an archetype that is just very good. So it's very easy to see something kind of branching out to a more normal tribal deck from Flash Soldiers into just normal soldiers.
I think last GP someone did try to run a Mono White Soldiers list with Chevalier's Lance plus Duelist Poise after Christopher Roseblade came out.
Yeah, so that's a very easy kind of thing to combine, especially since you want enchantments for like Founding Hero.
Yeah.
Just to civilize. But there's also kind of going deeper into the go wide plan rather than the more kind of go tall Chevalier's Lance kind of thing, with the shortly going to be updated trial recruitments, making 3 soldiers or 3 or potentially even 2 mana, as well as the kind of finisher that Flash Soldiers was playing in Golden Company Tactics, which conveniently has both soldiers and knights as supporting pieces.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is that I don't think Chevalier's Lance really plays well with the gold wide sort of plan, but I feel like Chevalier's Lance is still too good for you to not play, especially if you already have Downhill Forgemaster.
Yeah, definitely possible. But it's also possible that just going for a more standard go wide plan ends up being potentially better. There has been kind of some frustration with Chevalier's Lance that like it's very easily jumpable, as an example.
Right.
And it's not like you get too much utility out of Downhill Forgemaster outside of having Chevalier's Lance. There's a couple of random things you can play, like Cinder Blade and Ring of Souls, that are kind of a bit free, but you can't really afford to run a huge equipment suite to make the most use of Forgemaster. So
yeah.
So moving on to stuff that's a bit more out there, though still kind of within the realm of like decks that maybe people have seen before in kind of, or at least aspects have been seen before. We have Master of the Three Paths.
Yeah, and Augur did run it in Mardu Prowess this GP. And we have caught in video what this sort of card can do. Like in that game against Eureka Tell, it managed to tap down one of the Valir tokens in order to swing for lethal. And in another game against Mardu Tabia, Augur held up an instant which allowed Master of Three Paths to phase out during their opponent's turn in order to dodge removal.
Yeah, having 1 mana card with 3 different kind of aspects to it, even if you can only choose once every turn, or 1 every turn, is also a very powerful fact. Augur was also playing Scented Acolyte as another card that kind of has the same condition, which obviously has some nice synergy together. You can kind of build your deck around not working at sorcery speed. And conveniently, actually, both of those cards are monks, which lets you play Ssytai. I'll go with Ssytai.
Sure.
Idleglen Adept as another monk that kind of fits into this kind of tempo game plan.
Well, the problem is that it's blue, but you're already running red.
I just don't run red anymore.
Yeah. Actually, Through Ashen Gates is black, so maybe you can go Esper monks.
And conveniently, another popular monk that sees play is Cane Dancer. And not only does Cane Dancer have flash, so it works on that front, but it also gives you 2 spells for 2 mana. So really buffs up your Scented Acolyte quite a bit. Though it doesn't work quite as well with Master 3 Paths, but that's a pretty solid amount of monks to get things rolling. The
problem is that now you have to play 2 mana blue spells, and you'd rather play cheaper stuff to activate your monks.
Yeah, that's possible.
But maybe you run stuff like Social Graces so you can get discount and still be able to flash stuff back with Cane Dancer.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of direction you can go with it. But kind of the general tempo plans potentially come out of nowhere, even from kind of like seemingly mundane interactions.
Yep.
And I do find it funny that you have so many monks that kind of work with the same idea. I think they're all from different, I guess, Master, Acolyte, and Cane Dancer are all from different sets.
But maybe it's because the flavor of monks is just biding your time and striking at the exact right moment.
Very true. So moving forward, we have kind of more red-black kind of cards in plots that span realms, and X marks the spot. And while these cards have kind of different trigger conditions, I think they kind of end up being the same deck almost, even though they kind of fill different roles. A lot of the cards that play well with one play well with the other. So Sophia, good example of this, where Sophia play on turn 2, turn 3 plot that spans realms, and then attack with Sophia, threading the trigger, or the second mode to get the Jasper.
Yeah.
You can also talk about stuff like Profane Emissary to trigger it, as well as Emissary Event Victories, double Emissary kind of decks, where all these cards kind of make sense together. Emissary Event Victory is casting both Profane Emissary, just being kind of the best black 2-drop, basically, with 2 cards that really want 2-drops.
And Sophia just being really good in these grindy red-black decks.
Yeah.
So something interesting about plot that span realms is that, do you ever run Karoa's Downfall with it?
I think that's as generally no. They definitely can. Karoa's Downfall is kind of in this kind of muddled in-between where really it's somewhat difficult to make use of all the modes. Most decks only care a ton about one of the modes.
Yeah.
So being able to choose any number doesn't matter too much. Though Cane Dancer decks probably don't like it very much.
They don't have anything to sack.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely getting all 3 is very difficult. Getting 2 working might be doable, but it's also facing really stiff competition with stuff like Memento Mori being an instant, as well as Prying Prairie giving you a clue, just making it so much better of a kind of grindy card. Or even just 1 mana discard in general, like your pay-ups and your Valdez's and what have you.
Yeah.
So I think chances are outside Span Realms probably doesn't want to be fetching Karoa's Downfall in comparison to some other late game threat like a Xanagan or Lucian or an Answer or a Sophia or what have you. But definitely not super crazy to run a random one of Karoa's Downfall just for that case. So moving forward, we have another Escapade in Performance of a Lifetime, which was nerfed shortly after the set released. For 1 mana to 2 mana.
Yeah.
Very appropriately, I think, since it was kind of silly at 1 mana.
And also, the second chapter worked on both spells.
Yeah.
Instead of just the second spell.
Yeah, I think this card is still really underplayed. It does require a bit more work at 2 mana, since it's much harder to get the second spell cast on the turn you cast Performance of a Lifetime. Since now you're doing it on turn 3 rather than turn 2, unless if you want to mess around with rear lines or whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, 3rd mode is just so powerful, it's probably worth doing.
And you did try making that Molten EHS deck.
Yeah, so Molten EHS, I think, is the only deck that's played it since it got the nerf. And that deck, it's very good. Where just like copying a Solar Flare twice is obviously quite good. Copying an EHS is better. Copying cantrips is quite a bit easier if you don't have the mana for that. But it does a lot for 2 mana, even if it doesn't directly affect the board until you get to the 3rd mode. Since worst case scenario, it's cantripping off the 1st mode.
Yeah.
Even at 2 mana. This card still has quite a bit of potential.
So next up, we have Legacy staple, Abundant Harvest.
I don't really want to talk too much about the effect of Abundant Harvest, because it's basically just a cantrip. But what I do find kind of interesting about it is that often there's not a ton of reason to be blue when you're playing cantrips. It almost feels like a lot of the decks in the format just play blue just for the cantrips almost, with like Monkey Giant and Wheatfoot Chaff being incredibly powerful cards.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there not being a ton of great blue cards higher up the curve for decks that really want cantrips, where even decks that kind of would like cantrips don't even want like the normal cantrips, where if you're thinking of like Blue Red Prass, Crossing the Fog being the blue quote-unquote draw spell of choice.
Yeah, and Consult Ancient Knowledge.
Yeah, or before it is about to be changed. Whereas, like, if you just really want to find that one card, obviously Conjure Reality is on 4, but that's green as well. So in terms of, like, getting higher amount of filtering, often you might not even want to be blue, and Abundant Harvest really helps that.
Yeah, Molten EHS took full advantage of that.
Yeah, but you really don't lose too much from not being blue, just in general. Where like Conjure Realities is an exceptional card, but there's also Tally's Council as a replacement if you can go in Jund colors.
Or Tinyvale.
Yeah, Tinyvale is another example where it really opens up a lot more color combinations with decks that don't really have a reason to play blue for reasons other than the card filtering.
Yeah.
So Fang Den Headhunter, in a lot of ways, it kind of, I think, performs like you might expect it to. But like, I think to a certain extent, the card kind of explains itself, what it wants to be doing, where putting creature on top of your deck, or second from the top, is just kind of creature combo bait, almost, when that's the deck that's being played in, and you're kind of happy with that. I think it's kind of interesting because in particular, because it works with Prophecy.
Yeah.
So you can actually turn 1, get a Stormwing Raven, and exile 2 Prophecy, and then you have this 0 mana Stormcrow lying around, and you can potentially use that for stuff like In Spirit or
Right.
Mystic Parliament.
Yeah, Mystic Parliament. That's a card that you've been talking a lot about.
Yeah, I think Mystic Parliament is definitely a card that is waiting for a deck to be built around it. And Fang Den Headhunter kind of doubles up on that, where you can find a Prophecy creature, and then it also adventures, so gives you a lot of value in the late game.
I mean, sometimes you just play it blind and hope to flip a creature off the top.
Yeah, I mean, it's 4-mana 3/3 isn't the absolute worst, even if you whiff. I mean, there's been enough times that you play Valdez when your opponent has 4 cards in hand, and you're just like, yeah, this is fine. Spends your mana. Your opponent has to answer it at some point.
Yeah. So speaking of creature combos, we have Impromptu Escapade, which allows you to basically put your combo pieces outside of your main deck so that you draw them at the appropriate time instead of clogging up your combo turns.
Yeah, so having Wish be instant speed, I think is kind of a unique property of Impromptu Escapade. And not only is it instant speed, it gives it flash. Well, it's the next thing you cast flash. It doesn't even need to be what you grab.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting because a lot of times with wishes, you kind of need to cast them in preparation for something. Since just by virtue of being a tutor, it's kind of hard to cast the tutor and what you're fetching. When a lot of the times you want to be fetching a threat with the wishes rather than an answer. Whereas Impromptu Escapade kind of skips that with being able to cast it at any of your opponent's turn, untap, play your answer.
I feel like half the time I played Impromptu Escapade, I never made use of the flash granting part.
Yeah. So there's a couple of really good creatures to grab off Impromptu Escapade, depending on what colors you're in, obviously. Suburban Rune is one example of that, where it can very easily take over a game versus an unprepared opponent.
Although Suburban Rune is a lot worse after the Shifting Land nerfs.
Yeah, but I don't think you even need Shifting Lands in this case. You just play on the board. You have 5 lands, you're countering your opponent's spells, maybe playing Cane Dances and whatnot, and then turn Impromptu Escapade, grab a Rune Brawler, untap, Rune Brawler, fetch land, play your Solar Flare, whatever.
Yeah, just Rune Brawler things.
Yeah. There's also some like utility with fetching, say, like Burning Heart as another example, when it kind of gets around the creature condition in a way where you can cast Adventure off of Burning Heart.
And speaking of getting around creature conditions, Impromptu Escapade also allows you to run first mates like Mabel and Garth despite having access to creatures.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny property in that way. But still, it's admittedly still a bit awkward because you don't really want to side the creatures in. So you do kind of have a bit of a dead sideboard slot. But being able to get around conditions, if you have like a single creature you want to play, that would be really nice, whatever the hell you're doing. And it doesn't fit your Mabel condition and obviously doesn't fit Garth as a condition. Definitely helps you get around it in that way.
Yeah, and Impromptu Escapade is mostly competing with Epic Encounter. Epic Encounter can fetch more than just creatures, but it can only fetch legendaries.
Yeah, so Epic Encounter fetching planeswalkers and lands, I think, are the main 2 things it's been used for. Hot as Zedina and random planeswalkers like Karoa or Mary as nice answers. Impromptu Escapade can't do that, but I think the utility Flash probably makes up for it. Yeah. Especially in decks like Mabel, where obviously you can't play Epic Encounter.
Well, actually, I think Epic Encounter and Impromptu Escapade mostly go in different decks because Epic Encounter gives you a better choice of finishers.
Yeah, just with how you want to be playing at instant speed, there's definitely less good ramp at instant speed. We're kind of limited a bit more to like Sanguine and Confirm, which are both now 3 mana options.
Yeah.
Whereas with Epic Encounter, you're free to play whatever the hell ramp you want, whether it be like we call Forgotten Aeons or Mana Dorks or what have you.
Yeah, and then you can top off the game with a Planeswalker instead of a creature.
Yep. So Everly Adventure is kind of a big part of the set in general. That's come a couple times with like Dawn Forgemaster and Valdez and Fang Den Headhunter.
Well, of course, it's called Adventures of Nora.
Oh, very true. So I think a very interesting part of adventure as a mechanic is that it kind of lets you get around certain conditions in deck building that are typically kind of a bit more difficult to include, as well as it gets around kind of certain conditions on what a card is. So like Impromptu Escapade fetching Burning Heart.
Yeah.
It kind of gets around Impromptu Escapade not being able to fetch removal, or good removal at the least.
Yeah, and also stuff like EHS casting adventures that cost more than 2 mana because the front side costs 2 mana or less.
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways that like adventure kind of cheats on that. So kind of continuing with that, we have kind of adventure creatures that are like really good utility. And by them being breachers, you can kind of fetch them more easily. So Mikkino and the Panya of Lands Unknown.
Panya number 2.
Are both like much more fetchable from stuff like Decide Boundaries and Sworn Cohort than Interaction normally is, where suddenly with your Sworn Cohort is able to fetch a counterspell, or at least a remand type effect, which is something that's very unique as far as kind of deck building goes. So it kind of lets you cheat on things where normally you would have to unhappily play some random counterspells to fit in your interaction suite. Now you can play it with your creatures if you need your creatures to be doing what your main game plan is.
Yeah.
Additionally, adventures kind of split the card into two, where the card is more expensive, but obviously does two separate things.
Yeah, so you can get extra spell casts off stuff.
Yeah, and it also lets you play kind of a much stronger late game plan with much easier conditions, or with much less deck building consideration. So considering something like Heroic Aspiration, which fetches a creature with adventure, and then kind of also has this additional kind of ping your opponent mode, as well as gain some life.
I feel like the second ability doesn't really matter that much.
It's definitely much less important than the first, but at the same time, incidental life gain is a kind of big deal.
Right.
Where even if you're playing like a Scorch or whatever, just like having that incidental life gain versus decks that kind of are trying to beat you down on an expensive card, especially since this is kind of like a 3-mana shooter.
Yeah.
Makes it much more interesting, I think. Granted, it is also competing with a lot of the other tutors that can fetch creatures.
Yeah, plus it's 3 mana. That's a lot of mana to tutor something.
That's true. So like you're also comparing with like Zareen as another 3-mana tutor. Zareen only fetches stuff that's like 2 CMC or less, but I think a lot of the adventure creatures are probably like Panya and Mikkino are about 2 CMC or less. So there's probably a good amount of overlap in what you want to be fetching with like Zareen and Heroic Aspiration. But I think the kind of ability to gain life makes the second part of Heroic Aspiration kind of more impactful than Zareen.
Right.
There's also stuff like, if you want to really go deep on adventures, there's stuff like Fennek Farstrider, which has a pretty solid adventure just as a card advantage spell, even if it's kind of a bit like block-based. But being able to cast kind of reuse your adventures can potentially set up some lock-type scenarios, especially with Panya of Lands Unknown being a remand type spell.
I mean, Fennek also works really well with first Panya because you can use it to reset the tail.
Yeah, very true.
At instant speed even. So
you can definitely get a lot of ways to use your mana, I guess would be a good way to put it, when you're using these venture cards. Yeah. You're kind of building around them more specifically.
You have tons of options. You just have to make sure that your extra options don't come at the cost of too much power.
Yeah, there's definitely a concern that you have a lot of stuff to spend your mana on, but also you're not really doing anything with what you're spending the mana on.
Yeah, the stuff you spend your mana on is less impactful.
So again, like that kind of came out the box, where it's like, yeah, you have this incredibly powerful card advantage engine, but part of your spells are 1-mana draw card. So it's not quite the power level that you might expect it to be. There's also some of the more other support cards with Siltbottom Conductor as another example, where 2-mana kind of, I guess probably Mana Dork is probably what you want to be using this for, the main creature mode. So like with Rail Lines as an example, it's pretty easy to make that into mana ability. But it's also just a fork, right? 3-mana fork, which is kind of an incredible utility, even if it's just kind of like a fetch target.
Right, and it doesn't even have to target your own spells. Copy your opponent's spells too.
Again, kind of stacking up on that utility. Though at the same time, the 2-mana casting it as a creature is definitely not too impressive.
Yeah, but again, you're paying in power for modality.
Definitely. So maybe you don't want to go full in on adventures, but the fact that you do have these kind of good set of creatures to fetch off kind of creature tutors, those potentially give decks a lot more utility. There's also kind of more specific adventures support with like mentioned Bleakrealm, which additionally gives a ton of card advantage. Well, maybe not a ton, but a good amount of card advantage for just 2 mana.
Yeah, but at the same time, do you really need even more card advantage after your adventures already give you card advantage?
I mean, I'm not one to turn down card advantage.
The less it comes at the cost of spending your mana on things that don't impact the board.
So you get to like cast so many things. It feels good. Draw so many cards.
Yeah.
And you can always kind of adjust with making stuff cheaper. Like Venture and Bleakrealm very naturally plays with Dawnhill Forgemaster.
Right.
Since it triggers on both equipment and adventures. So you can go Venture and Bleakrealm, and then you Dawnhill Forgemaster for a Cinderblade.
Right. And you play Cinderblade and equip it, and swing with your hasted guy who got buffed by the 3rd chapter.
Yeah, and then you sack the Cinderblade, and suddenly the thing you're buffing with the 3rd chapter is gotten +3/+2 when double strike, and that's suddenly very scary. You can kind of adjust, which makes kind of these cards very interesting. And then you also have the more expensive game plan if you can afford to do that, where you kind of slow down and go, oh yeah, I'll Dawnhill Forgemaster for my Shion, and then my Shion will trigger my eventual Bleakrealm, and they'll get a land, and then eventually I'll win the game somehow.
And probably throw in Celson somewhere in there.
Yeah, potentially. But with these 2 cards, you can definitely be very modal with not only what you can fetch, but how fast you're trying to play the game. So kind of playing into that kind of venture plan, you also have stuff like Shifty Think, where even if you probably don't want to be fetching Shifty Think, kind of with a venture plan, it still kind of plays into this kind of modality of adventure cards.
Yeah.
Where it lets you play cards that normally you wouldn't really want to be playing, but are actually kind of good. So Mind Rot is not really a good card.
Yeah, but what if Mind Rot gains you 2 life?
Still not a very good card.
Aww.
Unfortunately. But the thing is that the reason it's not a good card is more so, I think, because you don't want to fit it in your deck, rather than you don't want to be casting it.
Right.
Because there's very few decks in the format that are okay being Mind Rotted, to be honest. Like, most decks kind of end up on relatively empty hands fairly quickly, but like not quite fully empty. They'll have random stuff floating around. And if you snipe those last 2 or 3 cards, the Mind Rot, you're just incredibly happy.
Yeah.
Where like stuff like where everything stuff like Planeswalkers sitting around at like 4 or 5 mana are pretty good things to hit off Mind Rot. But even stuff like EHSs occasionally just sit in people's hands for a little bit.
Right.
Since that's just the most expensive card on the deck. And being attached to a not great, but actually pretty okay 1-mana creature makes Mind Rot, which is kind of a bad card, much more appealing. But it's just because you don't actually really need to put it in your deck fully. You can kind of cheat and put it in your deck using a different card. So kind of continuing that, the creature land, not a creature land, the
Adventure lands.
Yeah, the adventure lands kind of give some interesting effects, which you don't really want to put in your deck, but actually do want to be casting. So to highlight this, I'll mention Dawnhill Outskirts, where anthems are actually really hard to put in your deck, where it's a very real cost, but suddenly with Dawnhill Outskirts, you're just getting it for free on land.
I mean, you're getting the worst anthem in the world for 2 mana, but at least it's on a land.
Yes, the worst anthem in the world, but it's an anthem. And that's just, I think, just kind of good enough, to be honest.
Well, the problem is that if you're playing in an aggro deck, it's a top land.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, if you're playing in a tokens deck, where you're kind of almost tending more towards a combo kind of decks rather than these 1, 2, 3 aggro decks, I think it's honestly pretty fine playing tap land.
I mean, I would rather just play Mozekef then.
I mean, there's Mozekef. At the same time, Mozekef is kind of a bit hard to activate. Or if you attack in 10 times, that's a lot more than what most decks do. And importantly, you need to actually have Mozekef in play when you attack 10 times.
Right, but Mozekef is fetchable.
And I don't think it's quite as bad as like being fully 2 mana, because after you cast the adventure, you can just play the land untapped.
But then that means it works really badly with haste creatures.
That's true, but I don't think it's that relevant.
Yeah.
But I could kind of see a curve where you go like, one drop and then play 2 more 1-drops on turn 2, and then turn 3 play Dawnhill Outskirts Adventure, then play it from Exile untapped, and then play a Scorch removing blocker, swing in. I'm telling you, it's done quite a bit there.
I guess that works.
And it does also kind of let you like play a higher land count, or like play a fake high land count, which makes your mulligans a bit nicer.
Right.
Kind of similarly, you have Fang Den Jaws as a card you don't really want to put in your deck, but is honestly kind of good. Where just like Fang Den Jaws in particular, kind of differently than Dawnhill Outskirts, is honestly just kind of fine to play on turn 2, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you're not doing anything else with your mana, it's basically a burn spell.
Yeah, it's a pretty good burn spell too, even. If you're kind of in like a theoretical red-green Prowess kind of deck,
right?
Then playing Prowess Creature turn 1, turn 2, Fang Den Jaws, get the Prowess trigger, attack for 5.
Huh.
I mean, that's a lot of damage. And you're getting it off a land, then you get the third land untap next turn. So it doesn't take that much effort. And that's like pretty basic kind of idea of the card, where like that's not even getting in stuff like double strike shenanigans or
Balance Blade.
Combining it with Balance Blade makes that into 8 damage on turn 2, which is pretty scary. Maybe combine it with an Acorn Assault and slowly get your way up to 20 damage.
And I guess Leafdown Hunk, similar sort of effect.
Yeah, so Leafdown Hunk being kind of like a fake way to, well, not a fake way, but like Leafdown Hunk is interesting because it both ups your creature count and your spell count, where if you can play it after a buff spell, you can get up to 4 power. And then you go like turn 3 Strong Arm a Prowess creature, 4 power creature, play down Leafdown Hunk as a 4/4.
Well,
ultimately play the Adventure, attack for 8.
The Adventure is basically just a worse version of Strong Arm, right?
Yeah, that's true. But it comes attached with a creature that potentially is just a 2-mana 4/4 trample.
Yeah.
And a lot of times with decks that are trying to do like A plus B stuff, you have a lot of A and a lot of B, but not a lot of A and B. With the A and B cards are the cards you really want to covet.
Yeah.
So a good example of this is Enraptured Countess, where Enraptured Countess is both a creature and a spell, or even multiple spells.
Well, it's even a prowess creature.
Yeah. So it's kind of feeling both conditions of cards that you want to be playing. And obviously, Leafdown Hunk isn't as good as Enraptured Countess, but it feels a very similar role and in kind of meshing your 2 parts of your deck together.
Right. Well, I think we spent long enough talking about adventures, so moving on.
Kind of staying in that prowess kind of idea is Sculptor the Ruby Sands, which I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about, but I think it's very interesting because of how it interacts with free spells, where if you can manage to play it and the spell in the same turn, then pretty naturally activates itself. But if you really want to get spicy, you can go turn 2 Sculptor plus a Rail Line and then attack for 3.
Well,
though more naturally, it's probably something like Sculptor plus Scorch on turn 3.
Well, I mean, the problem is that you're making your lands vulnerable.
Lands are fake, anyways. Your third land is a figment of your imagination.
But yeah, attacking with your lands as 3/1s, I don't feel like that enough of a payoff for how hard you're trying to enable it.
Maybe. At the same time, you do have a reasonable amount of ways to of A plus B kind of stuff. I mean, we're talking about Leafdown Hunk and Enraptured Countess as 2 cards that go pretty naturally in these A plus B style prowess decks.
Right, I guess. But at the same time, prowess decks can attack past 1/1 creatures by prowessing their guys, but this thing just throws lands away to 1/1 creatures.
That's true, but I don't know how many 1/1s are running around.
Portal Fracture?
Yeah, Portal Fracture exists, but at the same time, you have to specifically run into Portal Fracture. And also, if you're playing on turn 3 or turn 2, and you're trying to get attacks in that way, then you're definitely not running into Portal Fracture there.
Soldier tokens, I guess?
Yeah, definitely versus tokens, this becomes much more questionable. You do definitely have some ways to play around it, if you're playing Strong Arm and other buff spells. But I think if you're trading for a real card and not a token, I think you're pretty happy.
Yeah, I guess something else you can do is just not attack the land and just use it as an untap.
Yeah, that's true as well. Where if you just want to stack up a single creature, your untap land becomes food for your Strong Arm or your Leafdown Hunk Adventure or what have you. So that would require quite a few spellcasts. So
not as likely.
Yeah, but definitely an interesting card. So maybe before we have Slipsand Expedition, which is, I kind of want to talk about just because it's a very naturally efficient card, oddly. It doesn't feel like it should be efficient, but I feel like it just ends up being good enough a lot of the time. Where getting 1 damage plus 2 damage is just almost playable by itself, in a kind of arc lightning kind of way.
Really? I mean, it's 3 mana, and it happens over 2 turns.
Well, it doesn't need to happen over 2 turns. You can play it and another spell immediately. So I mean, three mana, deal 3, and then also having the third node add mana is kind of relevant for how many like red like flashback-esque cards there are. So like going like Slipsand Expedition plus a spell, or like just like turn 3 turn 4 play a spell, turn 5 say like a Raga's Frenzy or whatever, and then use the mana to make the tokens immediately.
Right.
Or play something cheaper and then use it to reprise is another kind of interesting aspect to it.
Oh, actually, Slipsand Expedition triggers in your opponent's turn too, so you can, if you set it up with 2 counters on your turn, and you can Rogar's Friend in your opponent's turn and then use the mana there.
Yeah, that's very true. You can also cast in response to the first trigger to get 2 damage triggers instead of the 1 damage and a 2 damage trigger. But there's actually a surprising amount of play to this card, which is kind of interesting, especially with how kind of expensive some of the red burn spells can be, especially if you want to be using them from yard. So moving on to a couple of the planeswalkers in the set, we have Adamor Otto Van Whiskers.
Did you know that there was planeswalkers in this set other than Barx? Because I didn't.
I mean, I've tried to make Barx Malhong work, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I think the kind of funny thing about this card is that it's almost not a planeswalker, just like at all.
Right. It's a creature that dies to attacks.
Yeah, but it kind of doesn't seem like it would play like a planeswalker, which makes it very interesting, because it doesn't have minus or anything. Like, I don't think you're ever getting to the ultimate, really.
Yeah.
But it's just like a very big creature, where even just with on an empty board, it's coming down as a 4/4.
A 4/4
indestructible.
Yeah.
And it can't block, but that's just kind of a good stat line, weirdly enough.
I guess.
It is a bit annoying that's not actually a creature, so you can't like play in a kind of cards that interact with creatures. It's like Impromptu Escapade as an example.
Right.
Or kind of stuff like Warlords Beyond. But if you just like wanted a 5-drop, I don't know what is necessarily better than this as kind of a general 5-drop.
Cosmonaut Pioneer.
Yeah, there's Pioneer, but at the same time, Pioneer doesn't really kill your opponent very well.
Right.
Where like stopping 2 3/3s is relatively easy, where stopping a like 8/8 and indestructible definitely is a lot harder.
Yeah.
Where a lot of kind of mid-range green threats don't actually beat like a Profane Emissary, which is kind of a bit sad, to be honest.
Well, yeah.
Whereas this auto is just like big enough that it just does that.
It doesn't do that on defense because it's not a creature on defense.
That's true.
That makes jumpers.
I mean, it's passing to 5 loyalty, so it can at least take a hit. And I mean, it also dodges most of the creature removal in the format, where like you're only really being hit by like journeys and as well as like out of body experience.
Yeah.
But like Pith Will obviously doesn't hit it. Burn isn't really the greatest since it's at so much loyalty.
Exunt doesn't work because you get the plus right away. Or actually, no, they can Exunt in response to plus.
Yeah, but it's a bit harder to work around it since it does make another body. And indestructibility preventing stuff like Enter's Mephisto's Gate is really nice too. I think if you just want a good general 5-drop that will kill your opponent in a couple turns, I think Auto might actually just be the best choice, which is kind of interesting. Going to another Planeswalker in the set, we have Boxu and Malong. This card is kind of crazy, but also kind of hard to use, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, I mean, you did try to build a deck around this thing, right? And it was a very interesting deck that had trouble killing people. Yeah,
so I messed around with Boxu and Malong before the Performance of the Lifetime nerf, which obviously made the deck a lot better, having a 1-man performance instead of 2. But Boxu and Malong just like seemed very good, but at the same time, it seemed kind of hard to make a shell where you're doing stuff that's nice and proactive. Where you're not following the problem of like, oh, let's try and just cast 2 spells.
Yeah.
And not think about what those spells are actually doing.
The spinning in your wheels problem.
Yeah, exactly. where you want cantrips so you can cast 2 spells, but at the same time, well, cantrips don't do anything.
Yeah.
You kind of need a threat to win the game, but, well, threat to go for.
I think he tried Unceasing Flames.
Yeah, Unceasing Flames seemed like weirdly the best option to win the game, but that's maybe a problematic way to win the game in some respects, with its weakness to Grave Hate and Life Gain and whatnot. But the card itself is just an incredible amount of value between, like, even just +1ing twice is well worth your effort, let alone -2ing and basically drawing 2 cards.
Yeah.
Let alone +1ing and -2ing, and then being able to +1 and -2 again next turn. Or if you +1 twice, you can ultimate next turn, which is kind of incredible.
Right. Although, to be fair, the ultimate isn't that amazing.
Have you read it? I mean, Coffee is like all your spells.
Wait, it's...
I mean...
Oh, right. I thought it was just the next spell.
I mean, to be fair, if you're going ++ and then next turn +-6, you've already cast 2 spells that turn. So it's probably not going to be the biggest ultimate in that respect. But if you can just like +1/+1, +1/+1 next turn, and be set up for an ultimate, this is a very real ultimate for winning the game.
Right.
Even with just like a couple of burn spells, you probably get there. But I think unfortunately there's might not be a good kind of threat to pair with how good this card is, since casting multiple spells is not generally what mid-range tempo kind of decks are necessarily looking to do.
Yeah.
And even stuff like King Dancer would prefer not to tap out for a 3-mana walker. Additionally, the -2 not working super well with counter magic is a bit awkward.
Right.
So moving on to some random card, Heathcliff Caretaker. I think this card's kind of funny that it's probably actually good. More so a sideboard option than anything, but it's Grave Hate that also gets you value. Even if it's just getting you back a land, probably still just pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, you probably don't want to play this card in a deck with fetch lands, right?
I don't think you care that much, to be honest. I think against the decks you want it for, it's like Cane Dancer decks, an example, where you just like mess up their Cane Dancer and then play a 4/3. I mean, they have to kill the 4/3.
Right.
It's not really a card that you can ignore. And I mean, yeah, getting back a land isn't the best, but if you get back a fetch land, you can fetch your man land.
Right.
And then you have more mana to activate your man land. So it's definitely worth something, even if it's just getting back a land. And of course, if you get back a spell, it's obviously excellent if you can use Adventure as well.
Do you ever adventure your own graveyard to get back better stuff?
Maybe.
I guess if you don't have enough targets on the opponent's side, you can just exile some of your own lands from your graveyard or later.
Yeah, probably. If your opponent only has like 1 or 2 Cane Dancer targets, you spend the last target or 2 in your own yard. Just give you a better chance to get back a spell.
Yeah.
But moving forward, I think Pedo is really an interesting card. Do you get the impression that this card's good?
Not really. I mean, it's 3 mana and it requires you to have a board in order to do anything.
Yeah, so that was kind of my impression too, but I think it's actually kind of good, weirdly, because obviously you do kind of want to be playing other scouts, but just kind of as a baseline, 3 mana 2/2 scry 2, and then you attack with it the next turn, which is kind of like a draw card, provided you scry to the top. I mean, it's not the worst. It's something. But if you're combining with other scouts, it starts to look kind of good. So, like, maybe the most clear example of this is Leery Sortie, which makes 2 scouts.
Right.
And mind that the attack trigger is actually not 1 or more scouts, it's 1 of a scout attacks. So if you go turn 2 Leery Sortie into turn 3 Pedo, then you arbitrarily top both cards.
Sure.
Then you attack with both your scouts, and suddenly your Pedo is a 3 mana 2/2 draw 2 cards. Which is something.
Yeah.
And then if your scouts survive, then you're drawing probably 2 cards off attack next turn.
I mean, how likely are you to guess the right type if you don't know what's on top?
I mean, if you don't know what's on top, you say non-land. But the thing is that you guaranteed to hit on the next trigger if you guess wrong.
Right.
So, very worst case scenario, you're on 2 scout attacks, you draw 1 card. And obviously, Leery Sortie is not necessarily the best card, but there are a fair amount of decent scouts between like Lone Survivor, Ruin Delver, Guardian of Ranavir.
Wait, those guys are scouts?
Yeah. I mean, a whole bunch of random scouts. Obviously, Leery Sortie if you want to be going deeper. Portal Fracture makes scouts.
Right.
If you want to go At a deep, you can play Grand Expeditions, which is kind of interesting. That also makes scouts. Untethered Disciple was another random card that makes scouts. And I mean, admittedly, a lot of these cards aren't necessarily the most, like, you're not jumping for joy getting to play them, besides, like, Lone Survivor, obviously.
I don't think you can play Lone Survivor in the Scouts deck because there's too many human Scouts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd call this, like, necessarily a Scout deck. I think probably just with, like, 8 more Scouts, you might just honestly be fine playing Peter. Maybe that's a bit ambitious, but it feels like not that hard to be able to get a draw card. And once you get past draw card, it's all upside from there.
Except you're playing a 3-mana 2/2.
3-mana 2/2 scry 2 draw card. I mean, sounds okay.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, definitely with like Lone Survivor and not really wanting to play non-creature spells, it's a way to get card advantage, which is kind of important.
Right. Usually Lone Survivor decks that beat down the opponent before card advantage matters.
Yeah, you can definitely be an aggro kind of plan with Lone Survivor, but there's also stuff like L, Time Bubbling, Lone Survivor kind of shells.
Yeah, the Submerg.
Yeah, Submerg. And if you're kind of looking at that, maybe you only go in like 3 colors instead. Maybe Peter has a place there.
Yeah.
But I think as far as like raw card advantage goes, Peter is kind of up there as far as 3-mana creatures go.
Yeah.
And even worst case scenario, 3-mana 2/2 scry 2 isn't the worst floor. Not good, but it's not the craziest thing.
Yeah.
So now we have another land from the set in Heathcliff Horngrove. So this card's really kind of awkward.
I mean, it's a Mutavault.
It's a Mutavault. But the weird thing about Mutavault is that's like, as far as like modern formats go, it's kind of awkward in a lot of decks. Since adding colorless is a lot of times really not where you want to be. So with stuff like green-white counters, which is a deck that actively triggers Menagerie for Astralhorn Familiar, you can't actually really afford to play colorless lands.
Right.
Because, well, Astralhorn Familiar costs double green. You're already playing random Seed Shrines, so your mana is already a bit worse. Your mana is already kind of tight because you want to be maximizing your first like 2 or 3 turns.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you have all your colors. So it's kind of awkward in that aspect. And of course, Mutavault generally showed up in like bigger decks than aggro. Like I remember making an Obstat standard deck as an example. But this is kind of awkward there too because, well, you're not really triggering Menagerie if you're going kind of bigger.
Right.
So it's kind of weird that even though this card's like really efficient, a 3/3 Mutavault is really good, both on attacks and blocks. It's kind of hard to make great use of it, which is a bit annoying compared to Risky Workshop, which more naturally plays with your, like, gets your colors and just generally plays a bit easier. So it's kind of awkward where that Risky Workshop might be better even though the Menagerie trigger is so strong.
Yeah.
There's probably a deck for it, but I'm not sure what it is. And also has a bunch of random graveyard stuff between Cooler, Sage Gloom Hollow, Leyline Invoker, and Paleo Lizard.
Yeah. How many changelings are there in the format for Kula?
Hollow Pools and the card from Over the Horizons.
Well, it's only creature cards, so I think it's only the card from Over the Horizons.
Actually, I think there's 2 from Over the Horizons. Watch of the Polyps and Luminal Lightthreader.
Yeah.
Oh, Boon the Facemaker from Seasons of War 2.
Huh. We have 3 changelings.
Oh, another random card from Seasons of War. Kalen. Yeah, changelings definitely work well with Cooler's cost reduction and as well as ability, where it immediately becomes a 2-mana 4/4 Death Touch that can demonic do it for 2 mana.
Yeah.
Leyline Invoker is similarly just kind of strong, where milling 2 on ETB and an upkeep and being reanimation does a lot of stuff you want. Pale Lizard, a bit less powerful, but really good utility. But
yeah, it's a 3-mana entomb at worst.
Also if you want something specifically to be in your yard, you can do that with Pale, so kind of incidental discard.
Right.
But at the same time, you do need to find something to do with this stuff, and I don't know what that necessarily is.
Maybe just reanimating something big, like Horrific Progenitor.
You can definitely do that. But at the same time, there's the question of why are you doing it in this way? Since something like Kula doesn't really make a ton of use of that when you can just play 3-mana reanimation. So you kind of need to make your balance between like doing something powerful, like Horrific Progenitor, and actually wanting a 2-mana 4/4 Death Touch, which isn't necessarily easy balance to strike, but it does give good tools to graveyard decks if one such deck does end up existing. It's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Another synergy piece that kind of wants to be built around is Hoofcliff Hot Miner, which is made a lot more interesting by the addition of Quest of Blade in the format, since Quest of Blade did have embattled support, so getting counters on your dude becomes a bit easier. Granted, you still don't have a ton of options for putting a ton of counters on things, but you do now have Underpass Sentinel and Asmire as two pretty solid options that have incidental counters.
Or if you want to go into green, you already have all the cards from the counters deck.
At the same time, it is a bit awkward because the counters deck doesn't always get that many counters on things, where it's capable of putting counters on things, but I think for this card you really want to be having 4 counters to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Additionally, it's not hittable off EHS or like Brothers Reunion, which is another kind of awkward point for it. Though definitely something like Mattia kind of similarly fulfills the condition relatively quickly. And the card is quite powerful, even if it's maybe a bit clunky, where like being able to save all your counters is kind of a nice thing. But at the same time,
it still doesn't protect you against board wipes.
Yeah, it does not unfortunately protect against board wipes. Though, fortunately, Underpass Sentinel does.
Right.
Which is worth something.
I mean, if you dump a bunch of counters on Underpass Sentinel, you can use this guy to move the counters off of it.
Yeah, that's true. Kind of importantly there as well, you can kind of use it as an arc-round ravager kind of effect.
Yeah.
Where you kind of, if you like load up an Underpass Sentinel, then you attack with a bunch of stuff, and then you can sack the Underpass Sentinel to move counters on something else within combat.
Also, Wildbound Aspirant allows you to retype those counters whenever you move them.
Yeah, that's true. So then you can give Death Touch plus Trample, which is a very solid combination. Or just Trample in general.
Right, give Trample to itself so that it actually makes use of those counters.
Also, Countess has a kind of nice support in like Begrund as a very powerful 3-drop. Not only with the effect being very powerful, but making tokens equal to battle creatures. But also just being a 3-mana 2/4 double strike vigilance.
Yeah.
It is a bit awkward though that you need +1/+1 counters specifically rather than just embattled. So the easiest kind of ways to get stuff online for like Begrund with like Core Light Champion and other Aura Shapers like that doesn't work for Hot Miner, unfortunately. But still reasonably interesting card to build around, though maybe not worth the effort. So moving forward, we have Kaone of the Golden Sonata.
You mentioned that this card has busted potential.
Yeah, so baseline it's a 3-mana Archaeomancer, which is really good. Even if you can't cast a spell, goes back to your hand. If you get back if you target something as Scorch, obviously you can cast that, which makes a really, really good fire.
Yep.
And if we want to get kind of talking more degenerate stuff, we can start talking about stuff like flickering it, since it doesn't require casts.
Right.
And then if we want to get more degenerate, we can start to flash back stuff like Rejuvenation.
Right.
Or other kind of rituals like that.
I see.
Where I had a stint with Blue-Green Rejuvenation that you use Epic Encounter to fetch Kaone to then get played and recast Rejuvenation.
Right.
So it's really just not that hard to get up a decent storm count in kind of like green-blue decks, since it's also castable off Conjure Realities.
Right.
And then if you want to get even more degenerate, you can start talking about stuff like Artie's Invocation.
Yeah. This quote-unquote nerfed Artie's Invocation.
Yeah. Where it can pretty quickly get out of hand there when something starts making a ton of mana and engaging other things. But yeah, I think this card's severely underplayed.
Yeah. I feel like people need to start experimenting with this thing so that we can actually show off that's busted, because right now nobody really knows what to do with it.
Yeah, I think there's like enough stuff that's going on that it's kind of hard for this card to be a miss almost. It is kind of a bit awkward because Archaeomancer effects are one of those things that are good, but you don't actually want to put them in your deck.
Right.
Like this is the kind of thing where if you put it on Adventure, like if you put an Archaeomancer effect on Adventure, it suddenly becomes way better. But just by itself, it's a bit tame. But being able to free cast something is just so absurd if you're doing anything kind of innately powerful.
Yeah.
And its interactions with like Conjure Realities, it's definitely incredibly powerful. So I think the last kind of like bear card that I vaguely know what's going on for that I want to talk about is Olson's Almada, which is a very tame looking card, but I think it actually just ends up being very efficient, where you play it on turn 2 in a deck that has a whole bunch of random creatures, but it's kind of playing a control plan. Then you play some random dorky creature to crew it, you attack with it, make a 1/1 flyer, and then you just kind of slowly chip away and make 1/1 flyers, which chump block or attack as well as you play your interactive game plan.
Does that actually work out? I feel like that's way too slow.
I mean, it's slow, but at the same time, it's very cheap because you have to spend 2 mana once, some point in the game, and then you can spend the rest of your effort on interaction.
But like interactive creatures only?
It only takes 2 power on board to crew it.
Yeah, but
So, I mean, a Portal Fracture crews it.
I guess. Well, the problem is also it's only a 2/2. It can't get blocked/removed pretty easily.
Yeah, that's true. It does get burned out a bit, but it does have flying, so I don't think it's the easiest thing to block. And it is an artifact, which does open it up to removal, but at the same time, you're not playing it because it's an artifact.
Right.
So people probably won't side in artifact destruction. And if you're playing kind of like random dorky creatures, maybe your opponents don't really want to like keep in the burn versus you either.
No, this thing having crew 2 instead of crew 1 is a pretty big downside.
Yeah, crew 1 would definitely make it a lot easier to get things going.
I mean, if it had crew 1, birds that makes will be able to crew it.
Yeah, it would kind of defeat the flavor of the card. You'd have to over-crew it to start getting the counters.
Yeah.
But I think just in general, the birds just have a lot of utility between like chump blocking and getting chip damage and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think this card is generally probably worthwhile as kind of a efficient finisher-esque mid-range card. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, well,
but something like a Kalen or something might appreciate something like this.
Yeah, I guess we'll just leave it at that.
So then just kind of going through the last couple cards kind of quickly, because I think they're all kind of combo bait almost. Rainy Day Trailblazer is either busted or does nothing. I think there's kind of no in between.
I think it still does nothing right now.
I'm inclined to agree. See the World has very easy to win the game after casting it with like Apollo pools.
Right.
To work as your scout, since you get your entire sideboard after something like a Moonlit Hunter or a Fulfilled Twisted Dreams. Still costs 7 mana.
Yeah.
Blade of the Valiant. This card's really efficient. I have no idea what to do with it.
The fact that it's 2 mana instead of 1 mana probably means that it's not that good. I mean, the only reason Chevalier's Lance is insane is because it's 1 mana to cast.
Yeah, well, even at 2 mana, it's very efficient, but I think it kind of keeps it out of doing fair stuff at 2 mana.
Yeah, like, this thing is just, it's not Chevalier's Lance.
Yeah, it's not Chevalier's Lance, but if you can find a good creature that you want to give haste that you cast from exile, so say a Infectious Ego off of Tinyvale, I mean, there's maybe stuff there.
Yeah, I guess.
But you probably need something pretty deliberate to really make it work. Adventurers Assemble, there's probably a deck that insta-kills with this.
So, I mean, you can play this as a value card. I mean, 6 mana to fetch 2 5-drops is a decent rate. Probably a bit too slow, though.
You definitely don't need to, like, win the game immediately, but, like, you don't need an instant combo. But I think the decks that want to play this probably are doing some crazy thing, like Trigger Menagerie and then getting some arbitrarily large board state. Something along those lines, rather than just wanting 2 5-drops.
I feel like trying to do that off a 6 mana spell is a bit optimistic.
Maybe, but at the same time, I think you want to be playing a lot of big cards, and then this is also a big card, so kind of the conditions to play this card are really high. I think it does kind of need to like just win the game straight up almost.
Yeah.
How exactly you're doing that, I don't know. Definitely doesn't need to be like 20 damage face or whatever, but I think it needs to be something kind of unbeatable.
Yeah.
For how much you're investing into this card. Going forward, we have Selective Breeding. This card is really annoying to build with, since it requires creature types to be cared about.
Yeah.
There's always some stuff you can do with it, just because it's so efficient with only 1 mana, if you don't want to put anything into X. So you can do stuff with like Fate Stitcher, as a clear example of that.
Right.
Or other stuff that has arbitrarily large mana value, or has cost reduction or stuff.
Yeah, but the creature type restriction is probably what kills it.
Yeah, But it feels like there should be something very easy to do with it, considering like Fate Stitches is zombie and a wizard, which are definitely not rare types.
Yeah, but at the same time, you have what lurks beyond, and that's a lot easier to just work with. And it does something pretty similar. I mean, it even goes 1 up, so it's basically selective breeding for 2.
Yeah, with X equals 1. But at the same time, selective breeding does get cast off a single Fate Stitcher.
Right.
So you can much more easily initially get off the ground.
Yeah, but it doesn't let you go. But it doesn't let you go up the chain off free casts.
That's true. It's less abusive. So like Fate Stitcher for Fire Tree Seeker, I think those are both wizards. Doesn't quite get you there.
Yeah.
It probably does something though. And then finally, Final Ballad as another kind of combo card that probably does something, but who knows what the hell it does.
How fitting to end on Final Ballad. Also, I'm not going to bother reading what the card does because I see too much text.
It's like ad nauseum, except X is your life devil.
Well, okay, sure, that's a good way to explain it.
And you get X mana at the end of it. Yeah, but there's definitely a lot of cards from Manora that are definitely worth building around. I think the main ones being like the adventure lands. So we only mentioned 2 of them. There's 8 more. I think most of them are pretty solid in some scenario or another.
Some of them are a lot better than the others.
Yeah, some are definitely better than others, but I think just the fact that you can have a spell on a land is just always incredible. Same reason why man lands are great. There's definitely some other stuff that's just waiting for a shell, like Foxy or Malong. Is definitely a card that's certainly going to get there at some point. Impromptu Escapade is another. And there's also some kind of more out there stuff like Pedo, which would require a bit of work, but it's potentially worth the effort of setting it up.
Yeah. So I think my final impression of the set is that it's a very high-powered set and has a lot of, interesting cards. Not even just to build around, but just interesting designs in general. So yeah, personally, I think Anora is probably one of the top sets in MSEM right now, just from a set design standpoint.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those sets that like you don't quite realize how many cards are seeing play from it until you actually do a proper count.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of like Altabek in a way, because like Altabek has a ton of cards that sees play from it, but you don't really realize it until you actually go through its set list and just see all the familiar faces.
Yeah, definitely stuff like Rapacious Valor and Bloodjade Prophet and Mercantile Chords and Enhancer.
And literally just half the Enhancer red deck.
Yeah, there's a lot of cards from Altabek. And here there's like a really good variety where you have Brothers Reunion kind of style decks, very aggressively centered. And then you also have stuff like Barx, which completely opposite end of the spectrum, or like 3 Cheers similarly. Or like then you have tribal stuff with clerics and pirates, and then you also have more general go-wide stuff with Ghost Companion.
And then you have the adventures, which are acting as modality.
Yeah, and it kind of Valdez and Dawnhill Forgemasters as cards that almost make archetypes. Where both cards kind of give their respective kind of decks ways to punch through much more easily in the late game, which they were both kind of missing.
Yeah, and then Mattia revitalizing Temur Temple, among other things.
Yeah, definitely a really good variety of cards in the set, as well as cards that almost only have some kind of deck around them that just hasn't been found yet.
Yeah, but with that, I think we've talked long enough, so we'll just leave the set Yuru off at that.
Yeah,